First of all, I want to express my gratitude to the well-known business leaders and authorities of the World Economic Forum who have come to Buenos Aires for this meeting. I know that some have come from very far away to listen and see firsthand everything that Argentina has to offer them. Allow me to tell you that you will not return home disappointed. Whether due to policies against the private sector or the lack of interest in encouraging foreign investments from previous administrations, it is not very common for our country to host events where direct foreign investment is formed and promoted. Know that from the beginning to the end of our administration, we will advocate for the continuation of these types of events, as we will tirelessly work for a country with a free economy open to investments. I take this opportunity to mention that although my first speech in Davos has gained some global notoriety, I am not here today to talk about the direction the world has taken, but rather to share the direction that Argentina has taken since we assumed office. 10 months ago, nearly 15 million Argentinians decided to leave behind the recipes that impoverished our country for more than 100 years, to start applying the ideas of freedom, which are the only ones that guarantee growth and progress. I don't want to delve into something that we have all heard many times already, but the impoverishing model of the present state that was implemented in Argentina for so many years has left us with a country in ruins, where more than half of Argentinians are poor and with a per capita GDP that has not grown in almost 15 years. You are right, Tory. He is saying not to offend the dogs by saying they were the dogs, let's say, the previous ones. When we took on the regime of permanent deficit, unsustainable debt, and rampant issuance that all our predecessors had maintained, it had run out. We were heading towards hyperinflation. Furthermore, in the social dimension, a caste system had been established that divided politicians and their friends from the rest of society, where a few privileged individuals profited at the expense of all Argentinians. Imagine how bad things must have been for society to elect the first libertarian liberal president in history, something that doesn't happen under normal conditions of expression and temperature, right? Without a political party, governors, or a mayor, this is something that could not have happened if it weren't for the absolute economic, material, and moral failure of the castes model. But today I am not here to talk about what others have done, but about what we are doing and will continue to do. We assumed the government and decided to return to the basics. We are correcting the macroeconomic order no matter the cost, so that Argentinians can live without inflation for the first time in decades. We are restoring to the state its primary function, which is the defense of the life, liberty, and property of individuals, so that the private sector can generate wealth on its own. In other words, we are implementing the same ideas that lifted 90% of the world's population out of poverty in the last 300 years. It won't be easy. We have the challenge of rebuilding the political, legal, institutional, productive, and commercial reputation of a country that has been punished by unscrupulous and incompetent politicians for far too long. That is why, precisely because we start from the underworld, we must aspire to the highest, and that is why the compass of this regime change points to a very clear long-term goal: to be the freest country in the world. In this regard, we are building a new Argentina on 3 fundamental pillars: an orderly macroeconomy anchored in fiscal balance, a titanic effort to deregulate the entire Argentine economy that we have called the Great War Against the Argentine Cost, where we have our colossal minister and global example, Federico Sturzenegger, and thirdly, the recovery of the rule of law and the enforcement of the law, where the wonderful Minister Bullrich takes charge of putting security issues in order every day. During the campaign, we already warned about the importance of fiscal balance in our management. Upon taking office on December 10th, we reaffirm our commitment, knowing that fiscal balance is the foundation of economic stability and that a stable, predictable economy is attractive to investors and consumers. In these 10 months of government, we achieved the first sustained fiscal surplus free of default in the last 123 years in Argentina, in an unprecedented turnaround across the globe. The economists who told us it was impossible and that we had no economic plan have spent the last 10 months stirring up the return of the deficit to destabilize us. And we did not give them the satisfaction. As a result of the effort of all Argentinians, the value of our bonds has doubled, and we reduced the country risk from $3,000 points to less than 1,100. And we will continue to lower it, and we will achieve sooner or later to re-enter as an emerging country in the credit rating. I am strongly committed because at some point in the management, we will reach and be able to achieve investment grade. Argentina is valuable again because it has a government that for the first time in decades is doing what no one wanted to do and prefers to tell uncomfortable truths rather than comfortable lies. It is no coincidence that we have new investment announcements every day, and that the announcements of the RIGI, which is a special investment regime that we have enacted, are already around $50 billion. While the rest of the leadership focused on imposing restrictions on individual freedoms, with disastrous results, we came to impose a clamp, yes, a clamp on the state once and for all. That is to say, a clamp on the state. We are going to impose the clamp on the state. And it is precisely the drastic reduction of public spending that we are undertaking that will allow us to return to the private sector the product that the state took from it in the form of lower taxes. Without going any further, this Monday we dissolved the Federal Administration of Public Revenues, an overcrowded state agency that was used to target the private sector, and we created a new tax entity by cutting 34% of its structure. In other words, we reduced spending by cutting back on those who collect taxes. Returning to the idea of putting a clamp on the state, this is why we are fighting our own battle of Thermopylae, day by day, with 6 senators, 39 representatives, and the voice of millions of Argentines who support us in the streets and on social media against the great apparatus of the state party. Nobility obliges. I would also like to thank the political leadership sector that does not seek to scavenge votes, but seeks a true change for the country of their children and supports us by upholding our vetoes and our reforms to ensure fiscal balance and economic growth. There is another sector of the political leadership, a sector that only wants nothing to change, a sector that wants to continue protecting its privileges at the expense of all Argentinians. That opposition said we were leaving in January, said we were leaving during Holy Week, said we were leaving in June. And now they don't know where to hide because the chainsaw is running hotter than ever. Secondly, we are carrying out the most ambitious structural reform plan in history to lift the state's boot off the necks of those who produce, those who trade, and those who work to reduce the cost of economic activity in all its dimensions. We have called this initiative the war against the Argentine cost. Every day, our regulatory ministries eliminate some obstacle or deactivate a scam as if they were working in a bomb squad. In a quick review, we have already eliminated bureaucratic obstacles for the importation and production of steel, aluminum, construction materials, plastic, and synthetic yarns. We also simplified the export procedures, notably reducing the processing time for apostille procedures from 30 days to 1. We eliminated all discretionary controls for imports, including the disastrous SIRA system, which existed solely as a mechanism for embezzlement from the state, and we still have hundreds of thousands of obstacles left to dismantle. We are also reducing labor costs, allowing more people to enter the system and thus projecting personal growth for the first time in their lives. At the same time, we are lowering the tariff costs on which the disastrous import substitution system was built, which, at the expense of benefiting a handful of privileged individuals, punished society as a whole with lower quality goods and services at higher prices. The last of the 3 points I mentioned, and not for that reason any less important, is the restoration of the rule of law in Argentina. I say restoration because, despite what the fetishists of democratic rituals may say, the rule of law has not existed in Argentina for decades. The rule of law is a concept based on the fundamental idea that all citizens have inalienable natural rights, among which are the rights to life, liberty, and property. Under this premise, the function of the rule of law throughout history has been to restrict the power of the monarch so that he cannot infringe upon the natural rights of men. I believe it goes without saying that in Argentina, and you know this better than many, for about 100 years the state has systematically violated those natural rights in countless ways. Under the veneer of democracy, the worst atrocities have been committed in our country, because far from defending the rule of law, what has prevailed in Argentina is the reason of the state. That is to say, the needs of the state have taken precedence over the natural rights of citizens. From the ruling of the Supreme Court of Justice that approved asymmetric pacification in 2004, to the tax abuses from bank collections and withholdings imposed by the provinces, Examples of violations of fundamental rights have been commonplace throughout our history. The right to life, liberty, and property has been systematically violated, both for Argentinians and for foreigners who have decided to come and invest here. In summary, if the political caste needed to violate rights for the system to be maintained, justice has endorsed it under the doctrine that nothing is more important than the survival of the state and that all citizens' rights are subject to that. While they advocate for the famous welfare state, they do nothing but fight for the well-being of the state. We are the first government in decades to place the rights of citizens above the needs of the state. And we are also the first government in decades that is removing the state from the private sphere of citizens to live again in a fully functioning rule of law. That is to defend the institutions, that is to defend the republic, that is to defend the citizens. Returning to our management, our hypothesis has been proven and continues to be verified day by day. In less than a year, we have already reached the lowest inflation rate in the last 4 years, with prices in various sectors that have not changed for months. In other words, we have carried out the largest adjustment in the history of humanity and have not lost an ounce of social support. The retraction of the Treasury during these months has already returned 15 points of GDP to the private sector in the form of savings. Continuing on this path of adjustment is what allows for the financing of private investment, which generates genuine growth because the private sector relies on voluntary relationships to grow, and no one voluntarily engages in what is not beneficial to them. Above all, we carried out this adjustment without touching social spending. Moreover, we doubled in real terms direct benefits such as the universal child allowance and the food card. And we took power away from the slave-driving picketers because we understand that this is the human capital that will make this nation great again. This, together with the excellent actions of Dr. Patricia Bullrich at the helm of our nation's security, is allowing us to recover public order at great speed, putting an end to the scourge of blockades in just a few months. We have even pacified Rosario, a city besieged by drug trafficking, in record time. The effects of the birthday are noticeable. Sorry, but that's how life is. The cut to the state that we promised was not only in terms of spending, but also in terms of power. Regarding individuals, alongside the Basis Law and Decree 7223, we have carried out the largest structural reform in history, which was 8 times larger than Menem's reform. This allowed us to jump nearly 90 places in the economic freedom ranking, and we will not stop until we become the freest country in the world. That's why we still have 200 reforms pending. We are doing our homework at the pace that reality allows us. We know that regaining trust is not something that happens overnight. There's a reason the saying goes that trust goes up by stairs and comes down by elevator. Argentina has been breaking its word for 100 years, and the world has been getting burned by milk for 100 years. It is no coincidence that the Argentine population has elected as president a person who was in the private sector 3 years ago. It is because he knows that in the private sector, if your word is not valued, you won't get anywhere. Whereas in politics, the less one values their word, the higher they rise in the ranks. As I was saying, with the macro stability achieved after decades and the regulatory efforts and economic opening carried out through the foundational law and other instruments, we are creating a perfect storm of conditions for any investment. Let me focus on some specific sectors. Argentina has blessed soil with abundant and varied natural resources. Let's look at the energy sector. Dead cow is an extraordinary source of resources, the second reserve of J. Lloyd in the world. At a minimum, it can meet Argentina's demand for the next 150 years. Its development has made it possible to reverse our historical energy deficit of nearly $7 billion 10 years ago to a surplus of $4 billion in the first half of this year. The energy deficit is practically a thing of the past, and we still have a lot of room to grow. Thanks to the base law, we were able to modify the old hydrocarbon and gas laws so that, among other things, exporting becomes easier and faster. Let's look at mining. It is estimated that the Andes mountain range has 40% of the world's copper reserves. Without going any further, Chile exports $50 billion a year in copper. Do you really believe that God only blessed that side of the Andes and that on this side, magically, there is nothing? Thus, we have enormous mining potential in copper yet to be exploited. We also have the third largest lithium reserve in the world, with a dozen projects either already producing or in the exploration stage, as well as silver and gold mining operations. In addition, we must consider the development of the primary sectors in which Argentina is already a leader, but whose potential has been crushed for decades by the extractive regime that used them as a source of foreign currency to finance crony capitalism. Thank you. I am of course referring to the agricultural and agro-industrial sectors. Our fields produce food for 500 million people, but agriculture is not just about livestock, soybeans, corn, and wheat. It is also its derived products, as well as the productive technology in both genetics and machinery, in which Argentina is at the forefront. And there are also other sectors in which we are already protagonists, such as peanuts in Cordoba or lemons in Tucumán, and others that are still a potential. Do you know how much Chile exports in cherries? 50 times more than Argentina? Not 50 times more? Do you know how much Chile exports in salmon each year? $6 billion. We are doing well, thank you. Just imagine all the potential that exists. And finally, the innovation and technology sector. The Argentine people are privileged in human capital because nearly 100 years of collectivism taught us something. It is that we Argentinians have the ability to squeeze water from stones and to undertake even in the worst conditions. Or do you think it's a coincidence that despite being the country in the region with the lowest foreign investment in the last 15 years, we are at the same time the one with the most unicorns per capita? Well, imagine what the technology sector could achieve, especially under stable macroeconomic conditions and without the state's boot on its neck. As I have said on another occasion, there is no force in nature greater than an Argentine wanting to get ahead. That is why we want to create an artificial intelligence hub in Argentina, because we have cheap energy in cold places and large expanses of land to develop and supply computing centers. And because we have something that will be precious in the coming decades, faith and optimism in technological development, faith in entrepreneurs, and the regulatory freedom that corresponds to that faith in a world where the private sector, especially the technological sector, is increasingly constrained. To conclude, before winning the elections, we knew that Argentina is a country where everything is yet to be done. And since we took office on December 10th of last year, we began to transform this decaying present that was left to us into a future of prosperity for each individual who inhabits this land. The model of freedom that we are applying is not exclusive to Argentines. It is also an example for the rest of the countries in the region, which to a greater or lesser extent have also been punished by the same miserable policies of 21st century socialism. To open ourselves to the world, generate investment opportunities, and allow those who must create wealth, that is you, the private sector, to do so without being suffocated by the voice of the state. That is the example we want to set. Your cooperation is essential in this new chapter that we are writing. We invite you to reclaim the protagonism that the state unjustly took from you for so long. Once again, I thank you for the trust and interest in making our country a strategic partner for you. Our commitment is to make Argentina the freest country in the world. For us, for our children, and for all the men of the world who wish to inhabit Argentine soil, Argentina will be free. Argentina will be great again. Thank you very much. ¡Viva la libertad, carajo!